Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us. This is No Soundbites Allowed, and I am your host, Michael Voss, Dragon of the Southern Tier. Happy to be here with you today. And at this time, we have a special guest on the program. It is Mark Meckler, and you may know him from the Constitutional Convention of the United States, the CSG. He's also been the co-founder of Tea Party Patriots. He's online with us right now. I know the phone line's a little weak, but can you hear me all right?
I do. Great to be with you.
Well, thank you, Mark. I'm glad to have you with us. I know you've had a busy schedule, but you're doing a lot of work. I love it.
Well, things are a little crazy out there these days for anybody engaged in politics. I know it's madness, but from my perspective, it's a good time to be alive.
Well, I think it is, especially when you consider the opposite, which nowadays, considering the Truth Accountability Project, some people make me wonder some days. I got to tell you, Mark, when I was preparing for this interview and doing my research on you, the more I looked at it, the more and more that I had questions about, the more I wanted to find out. It's just incredible. You've been doing a lot of work. You've been an independent business owner back in 2007 until 2009. You've been a lawyer. You've been quite busy.
Yeah, I've lived a pretty varied life. I've ended up kind of walking a path that I didn't expect to walk. If you'd asked me 15 years ago, would I ever be engaged in politics, it would have definitely been no. Sort of by nature, I'm a serial entrepreneur. By training, I'm a lawyer. And then just kind of the way my path went, what God put in my path, I've become somebody engaged in politics full time. So it's been a surprising life, but a very full and good one.
It sounds like it. And I've listened to your podcast. For people who don't know, you do have a Sunday night podcast on the Convention of States Project, which people can see. You do that on Sunday evenings out of California. Let me ask you, what time does that usually go on?
Yeah, that's at 7 p.m. Central, and it's actually, I was based in California until about 2 years ago. I became one of the refugees, had to escape, moved east, and ended up in the center of Texas.
Oh, okay. I didn't see that. I was double checking, but I didn't see anything that said you had actually moved. Okay. A lot of people are moving from California, so I'm not surprised about that. And that makes it interesting because I know in 2011, was it because of the issue with you got arrested one time? Coming from California to New York, you had a registered gun, which was safely locked up in a lockbox, but you came into New York in LaGuardia, and they arrested you for that. Did that have anything to do with the move to Texas?
No, not really. I mean, it was definitely foundationally developmental for me to understand that you can go to a place like New York, and the Second Amendment actually doesn't effectively exist there. As you said, I was traveling with a firearm, unloaded in a locked case, a TSA-approved case, and I was in New York doing a bunch of media, and I generally try to travel with a firearm and get a lot of threats. Unfortunately, that's how politics are these days.
Sure.
And so when I can travel with a firearm, when I can carry a firearm, I do. And I was traveling out of New York after having done a bunch of media there, went to LaGuardia to check in. And when I checked in at LaGuardia, I declared the weapon, as you've got to do if you've ever traveled with a firearm. I asked for a firearms declaration form and filled out that form. They called over the New York, New Jersey Transit Authority, who decided to arrest me. And the issue is that there actually is a law in New York City that you are not allowed to have a firearm in New York City if you are not a New York City permit holder. This is something I wasn't aware of. Even though I do my homework, I'm a lawyer, I do my homework when I travel, knew the gun laws in New York, didn't realize there were different gun laws in New York City. And unfortunately, what they charge you with under those circumstances, they do this to over 400 people a year coming through LaGuardia, is they charge you with carrying a loaded firearm. It was empty, and I never carried it. It was in my luggage in a lockbox. But they charge you with carrying a loaded firearm. And for me, because I was a public figure, they threw an intent to do harm. So quite a chaotic day there. December back in, like you said, 2010. Really frustrating. Cost a bunch of money to go through all the lawyers. Ultimately, they dropped the charges. And so, long story short, it shows you how tenuous liberty is when constitutional protections are not guaranteed.
That's one of my big problems in New York. I'm an advocate against red flag laws. I'm an advocate against the New York SAFE Act, infringements on the Second Amendment. Like yourself, I'm a constitutionalist, so I understand exactly what you mean. And the fact that they tagged on an intent to harm just tells you how silly this really is. They're just looking to target conservatives sometimes, and it's very frustrating.
Yeah, I think they're looking to target conservatives. To be fair, they catch a lot of people who aren't necessarily conservatives. It's not always political. And for example, in my case, I don't believe they knew who I was when I was originally arrested. What they do is it's a gun confiscation scheme, ultimately.
Yeah.
Because remember, ultimately, those charges were dropped against me. There were no gun charges anymore. They kept my firearm, and when I asked my lawyer about getting the firearm back, he asked me, what did you pay for your Glock? I told him, I don't know, it was around $500. And he said, well, probably cost you around $10,000 to fight the fact that they've kept your Glock unconstitutionally. Probably better off just buying another Glock. So it's really just a firearms confiscation scheme by New York State.
Yeah, it's the same thing with the red flag laws, not only in New York State, but in the other 17 states that have it. There's almost never any regulation about returning the firearm when they are found to be, the person's found to be innocent. It's very frustrating. But then again, that's one of the reasons why I imagine you helped to create the Tea Party Patriots and then went on to the Convention of States. What led you to that specifically?
Well, initially, the founding of the Tea Party Patriots was just something that sort of happened accidentally, to be honest with you. I was not engaged in politics. I was very politically aware. I enjoy watching politics. But for me, for most of my life, it would just been kind of a sport. I sort of had my team. That was the conservative team, or at the time, it was the Republican team. And my approach to it was you pay attention, you root for your team, and if they lose, no big deal. If they win, yeah, it's better. But that was about it. I voted most of the time, not all the time, but I voted, and I never was engaged in politics more than that. When the Tea Party began back in 2009, it just resonated with me. I was one of the very early adapters. In February of 2009, I held a protest out at the state capitol in Sacramento, California. 150 people showed up. Subsequent to that, I gathered with some other people online, and we planned a follow-on event for April 15th of 2009, and that's the big one that everybody knows about, Tax Day Tea Party. 1.2 million people showed up at over 850 events around the country, and out of that, we founded Tea Party Patriots to be a go-forward place for the Tea Party movement, which really just didn't have any other place to organize. So really quite accidental. Ultimately, 23 million people joined that movement, 3,200 chapters across the country, and so that's kind of how I got my start in politics, all accidental.
Well, sometimes that's the best way. It comes from the heart and you're being honest. It's kind of like how I got my start doing political commentary 15 years ago. It wasn't an intention, but it is something that I have a passion for. And I think that brings about some of the best things. Speaking of that led you eventually to the Citizens for Self-Governance and the Constitutional Convention. A lot of people aren't familiar with either of those. Let's speak about Citizens for Self-Governance first. That's an organization you created. I have their website on the page up right now. Can you tell me what brought you to that and what is it looking to do?
In 2012, I was frustrated. I had spent all this time and money engaged in politics, literally kind of emptied my bank accounts because we didn't know anything about running a nonprofit. I came out of the entrepreneurial for-profit world. I'd done pretty well, but I spent all that kind of building up the Tea Party movement. By 2012, just intensely frustrated. The movement had largely been usurped by the Republican Party. They weren't standing for the things that I believed in or that most of us believed in. And I was really ready to walk away from politics and just go back to business and law again. And I had a donor approach me, and he said, you shouldn't leave politics. And we had a little debate about this, and he won. And the reason he won is he ultimately said, look, I will fund whatever you want to do as long as you stay in politics and stay true to your principles. And I told him, I have no idea what to do. And he said, neither do I, but we do need to restore self-governance in America. This is kind of the fundamental precept of the American experiment, is that we're responsible for ourselves. And at the root level, it's for ourselves, our family, You go out into your church, your synagogue, whatever, your city, your county. Ultimately, self-governance means we're responsible for the whole thing. And he said we have to restore that sense of agency to the American people, that they really are in charge. And so we'll do projects that come out of that concept, and that's how Citizens for Self-Governance was founded.
It's been an incredible organization. One of the key things that it's been focused on, besides many of your articles that you've written about, and you're prolific in some of the writing, I love it. Most recently speaking about Kristi Noem, and then you've also been talking about the federal agencies that's paid $2.3 trillion in wasteful spending of taxpayer money. But the Convention of States is perhaps one of the things that you're best known for at this moment. Now, currently there are 15 states that are involved with this. You need 19 more. This is found under the Constitution under Article 5. Can you tell us a little bit about what is the intention of the Convention of States, and how are you going about that?
Yeah, after I'd been involved in politics for several years, a very good friend, a brilliant man, approached me. His name is Michael Ferris. Mike's the founder of the homeschool movement in America, founded Patrick Henry College in Virginia. Just really a genius. And I would put him up there with the founders any day. A man of great character and a lawyer, constitutional lawyer, incredible guy. And he asked me this question. He said, "Are you satisfied with what you've accomplished in politics?" And I said, "No, I'm incredibly frustrated. I've spent all this time and energy. We've elected all these people. They're doing the same bad stuff. Nothing's changing." And he said, "That's because you're approaching the wrong problem. You think that we have a personnel problem in Washington, D.C., when the reality is what we have is a structure problem. And as long as you put people into a bad structure, even good people into a bad structure, you're going to get bad results." And when I dug in a little further with him, he explained to me how badly we had bastardized our system of government. Largely the courts have done it to us, but Congress and presidents as well. And we'd moved far, far away from our original Constitution. And I challenged him on this and said, "Look, I mean, the Constitution, people don't pay attention to it now. So if we were to do something with it and amend it, it wouldn't work anyway." And he said, "Well, what Constitution are you referring to?" And I was really taken aback by this question. I mean, it doesn't make any sense. And he said, "Look, we have the Constitution you and I know and love and study. It's a beautiful, clean, clear, one-of-a-kind document. And then we have something that the United States government refers to as the Constitution. You can order it from the government printing office. It's over 3,000 pages long, and it contains every Supreme Court decision ever issued telling us what that beautiful, succinct document means." And he said, "And that's the document under which we live. That's greatly affected the structure of government. It's given much more power to the federal government. It's taken them way outside of enumerated powers. It's allowed them to impinge on our liberties. It's allowed them to infringe on areas that were intended to be state-based only for state authority." And he said, "Until we fix that, the elections, while we ought to pay attention to them and be engaged in them, we're not going to fix things until we fix the system." So the Convention of States project is intended to use Article 5 of the Constitution to get the states together in convention to propose amendments to restrain federal tyranny, specifically 3 areas: anything that would impose fiscal restraints on the federal government, anything that would impose term limits on federal officials, and anything that would impose scope or jurisdiction restraints on the federal government. It takes 34 states to call a convention. As you indicated, so far 15 states have actually made complete application. It takes a simple majority in both houses, generally speaking, no governor's signature necessary. 49 states have introduced the resolution. 30 states have passed it in one committee or another in either house. 23 states have passed it in one house or another. 15 states have completed the process. I expect in the coming year we'll get somewhere between 6 and 10 more states added to our slate of past states.
I do recall you speaking about that both on November 4th and on December 6th on your podcast. Now, one of the things I want to mention, you did run this as a trial. Now, a lot of people wonder, what is that like? How does this convention work where people come together and they make proposals? As stated in the Constitution, under Article 5, where the Congress, whenever 2/3 of both houses shall deem it necessary, shall propose amendments to the Constitution. Now, a lot of people are lost on that. How does that actually happen? In fact, you guys actually did run that by. You did try that, a trial back in 2016. And there were a few things that you guys were talking about in that, like not increasing the public debt unless there's a 2/3 vote in Congress, term limits, which I am absolutely in favor of on members of Congress, limiting federal overreach, and also repealing the 16th Amendment, which a lot of people are not familiar with. Can you tell me what are some of the key? I've mentioned a couple of the key proposals. Is that all that the Constitutional Convention is looking to do? Are there other things as well?
So, as discussed, there are three subject matter areas. The first is anything that might impose fiscal restraints on a federal government. The one that people would probably be most familiar with that would fall under that application is a balanced budget amendment. You know, if you poll Americans, and people have been polling Americans on this for over 30 years, what you find is somewhere between 80 and 85% of Americans support the idea that we ought not spend more than we bring in. You know, we all live this way. We know how it works. Most states have some sort of balanced budget restriction on them. The federal government does not, because of their ability to print money and raise taxes. They need it because this is what forces Congress to make difficult decisions. So one of the possibilities is the imposition of a balanced budget amendment. Along with that, personally, I'm in favor of the imposition of taxation and spending caps, because otherwise they'll just tax us into oblivion. And then there are limitations on places where the government can spend authority. So this comes in the area of putting scope and jurisdictional limitations on the federal government. For example, there's actually no specific authorization in the United States Constitution for spending any money on health care or any money on education or energy or any number of the alphabet soup of federal agencies. That power has been essentially granted by the Supreme Court through interpretations of the Commerce Clause, which was originally intended to be a very narrow grant of power. So one of the proposals under the scope and jurisdiction clause of our application is the idea that we would relimit Commerce Clause interpretation to put us back into the enumerated powers box. And then the last one, and super popular, is term limits. People love term limits on Congress, the idea of that. We don't have that now. Founders didn't put it in place because nobody would have ever wanted at their time to go serve in Congress forever. And so at this point, we've got people who've been serving in Congress for 40 plus years. And a lot of folks, about 85% of the American public, are in favor of term limits on Congress. I like it. I'm not in favor of it if we don't put term limits also on staffers and bureaucrats. Too much power resides with them. That's sometimes what we refer to now as the deep state. Mm-hmm. So I think we need to limit the terms of everybody in Washington, D.C. Another one I'd throw in there that's very popular is anybody who's elected to federal office or serves in a paid position in the federal government in any way should receive a lifetime ban on lobbying the federal government. So these are some of the proposals that are the more popular and well-known ones.
Okay. Let me ask, is it possible for people to add other things in a convention of states to bring it up? Things like maybe limits on executive orders, or perhaps reaffirming of the Second Amendment, or just to be even able to provide protections that we see, because right now we have the concept or the attempt potentially from a Joe Biden, if he is elected, to be packing the courts and to use executive orders on removing college debt, re-engaging in the Iran nuclear deal, and several other very troubling issues to a lot of Americans.
Yeah, so the answer would be yes, absolutely. And the way I would think about it most simply, Michael, to make it really easy for people to understand is if you think about this phrase, limiting the scope and jurisdiction and the power of the federal government, if you can couch something in a way that it would limit the power of the federal government, and certainly like you're talking about executive orders, if you think about obviously the president is a federal officer. He's the chief officer of the executive branch, and you would be able to limit his power to issue executive orders in this convention. So as you think about the ideas and run through your head the way you might like to limit federal power, that's how you can see if it fits within the call of this convention.
Well, that also brings up another question, because I've heard many people here in New York and around the country that I've spoken with, in talking about a constitutional convention, they've mentioned some people are afraid that Democratic Socialists of America, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, some of the more radical progressives out there could try and usurp the convention to try and pass things that most people would not want to be in there. Is there any safeguard on that, or is that an unintended possibility of freedom?
No, look, I don't believe there's any risk of that, and it's important that we get into specifics as to why. That's, by the way, the common parlance for that. People will say runaway convention. That's what they're worried about.
Yeah.
And so here's why it can't happen. And first of all, we have to know where the idea of a runaway convention comes from. You can go to our website at conventionofstates.com, look up runaway convention. You can see the summary of all these arguments and go into more depth. But you'll also see an article by David Horowitz, who is the primary chronicler of the American left. I mean, he is the best historian on the American left. He's looked into this. He said that this is a propaganda campaign, the idea of the runaway convention, conducted by the American left to prevent conservatives from using the best weapon they have against socialism, the best weapon they have against communism and statism, and that is to use Article 5 to rein in the federal government. That term of runaway convention was invented by Chief Justice Warren Burger after he retired. You might recall he's the presiding Chief Justice over Roe versus Wade. Certainly no originalist. He's a guy that was a very liberal, leftist, expansionist justice. And it was invented by him. It was then forwarded by leftist professors at Yale and Harvard, and it's been picked up by leftists and then unfortunately fed into the conservative movement. So you have people on what I would describe as the fringe of the conservative movement that carry on this belief. Here's the important thing to remember. If you look at our website, and you'll see this is all documented, people don't have to take my word for it. Every single major leftist group in the United States of America has signed a press release that says doing what we're doing is the most dangerous thing you could possibly do in the United States of America to our government. And every single nationally known conservative in the United States of America that has commented on Convention of States is in favor of it. That would conclude guys like Ben Shapiro, who's an endorser, Mark Levin, Sean Hannity, Glenn Beck is a friend and a fan of the project. All the major known national law professors who are at Princeton, and all the conservative guys, Robbie George and all these guys, Randy Barnett, who runs the Georgetown Center for the Constitution at Georgetown Law. All of these guys are endorsers and serve on our legal advisory board. And they all say that there's no such thing as a runaway convention. So the weight of evidence is on our side. History is on our side. There have been 41 interstate conventions in American history, including, obviously, the 1787 convention. None of them have run away. There's no history of that. And in the end, and this is the most important thing, Michael, it's just math. It takes 38 states to ratify anything that comes out of convention. And I'll offer the same challenge to your listeners that I've offered literally hundreds of times on radio and television. My email address is mmeckler, MMECKLER, at cosaction.com. If you're worried about this, then I would ask that you draft up, just in loose language, the amendment that you're worried about, and then list for me the 38 states that would ratify that amendment. Now, I've made that offer to millions of people, and I've received a sum total of 0 emails, because you can't do it. You can't find 38 states that are going to ratify something that you or I wouldn't like.
No, I agree with you, but I believe it's always important to raise the questions and hear the honest answers. That's the reason of the program. Not the 30-second sound bites. No one can intelligently talk about anything in politics in 30 seconds. So I want to take care of those concerns, and I thank you for that. And I want people to understand as well that the Convention of States is a big deal, because the 17th Amendment was created in part because of the Convention of States. Back in 1890s, people have been trying to elect senators directly rather than having states pick them, and therefore have a lot of yes men and women elected or put into place. And it was because of the pressure and the fact that a constitutional convention was going to require this, Congress took action and changed the rules, and that's why we have the 17th Amendment. So I have to say, even trying to get states to do a convention can move forward many of the issues that we are concerned about, like reciprocal gun laws across the entire United States. If you have a license in one state, it carries to every other state. So a lot of people don't know that. I did want to bring that up.
Yeah, and I agree with you completely. The act of calling a convention is actually, in my opinion, as important as the convention itself or what comes out of it, because this is an exercise of the most muscular type of self-governance that we have in the United States of America. If you think about it, it's going to take millions of people. Already 4.7 million are involved. I think it's going to take us over 30 million people to get that many people engaged. Then to get 2/3 of states, it's an incredibly high bar, 2/3 of states to call the convention, and then to get 3/4 of states to ratify an amendment. There's literally no other bar in the American system of governance that's that high. And to get citizens engaged and doing that, it takes millions of people. That's an act of political muscularity that I think is really important for the political health of the American body politic.
No, I agree with you, and I think it's important to highlight that for a lot of people. They don't realize how much power they have just by assembling under the First Amendment and citing the the Article 5, the power that the people have. And it's a very important thing to mention to people. And also, I want people to, because you brought it up before, I want to make sure people are aware that it looks like you're no longer on Twitter, but you are on Parler. So if they're trying to reach out to you or they're trying to follow you, besides being able to follow you on the Convention of States Project on YouTube, that they can reach you also on Parler. Is that correct?
Yeah, I'm one of the tens or hundreds or thousands of or millions of people now that have pulled off of Twitter. I'm on Parler. I'm tired of the censorship going on Twitter. I've left up my account there as sort of a headstone aiming at the death of Twitter, which I'm hoping for, honestly. And now I'm over at Parler, so you can just find me at Mark Meckler at Parler.
Yeah, and I have that up on the page right now. Actually, I see you joined in June. I actually joined back in February when I was at the CPAC 2020. So I'm glad to see you join us all there, and everyone is welcome. Let's address a little bit for time we have remaining. I want to go into, obviously, everyone's talking about the election. It's a big deal. It's very important. And the Convention of States, the work that you do, the things you speak about are not limited just to the Convention of States. You speak about a lot of things because, as you said on December 6th, people should be involved in their governments. And even if you are or are not involved in the Convention of States, it's still our government. We still need to be involved to make sure it's the best government possible. I'm not taking you out of context there. I am understanding what you said on December 6th correctly, yes?
Yeah, that's absolutely correct. Look, to me, the Convention of States project is what I would describe as an organizing principle. In other words, this is a project that is a state-based project. You've got to contact your local representative, but it's intended to have a national effect. And this allows us to organize state by state, state legislative district by district. And we have representatives now in every district in the United States of America. It's never been done before in American history. It allows us to organize in that way, but not just to the end of calling a convention. For example, in the general election in 2020, we engaged in a massive get out the vote effort. And what we're doing is we're aiming at like-minded people, people who love liberty, people who believe in limited government and believe in constitutional originalism. We wanted to make sure we did everything that we could to get them out to vote. We made roughly 3 million contacts, what are called peer-to-peer contacts. And so our people are texting people directly, calling people, encouraging them to vote. If you look at what happened across the electoral spectrum, I think it was an incredible election. Aside from the downside of what apparently happened in the presidential election, which looks pretty damn suspect to me. Yeah. Aside from that, you have over 126 seats flipped from blue to red in the state legislatures. Republicans flipped. The only houses that flipped were the New Hampshire House. Both of those legislative houses flipped from blue to red. It was really a wave election. You know, when they talked about a blue wave election as we were going into it, the only blue wave we're getting is a wave bye-bye, because they lost a lot of seats all across the country, from Congress all the way on down. 14 seats in Congress so far. Every single seat that was predicted to be a toss-up seat went to the Republicans. 7 seats that were predicted to lean Democrat went to the Republicans. It was actually an incredible red wave, and we participated in that on a get-out-the-vote basis.
Well, I think, and I wanted to bring up, it's not over yet, because you're looking at the very critical two races for the Senate in Georgia, where we've seen in Fulton County some of the most egregious, let's call it irregularities, I would call it fraud, that we've ever seen. When we see video of workers isolated by themselves counting somewhere between 18 and 24,000 votes, potentially, as the video showed, some of these workers are putting the same ballots through 3 times without any supervision. That terrifies me, because that's not America. That's not a free and clear election that people in Peru, Germany, Britain are watching us about. And I know that you're very involved in that race to make sure that we have a clear election. What are some of the things that you've been hearing about that people are trying to do in reference to Georgia and the Senate votes that are coming up?
Yeah, look, I'm actually really hopeful about Georgia, and not necessarily for the outcome, because I think that's up in the air right now. I mean, if I look at that race, to me, you've got Loeffler versus Warnock. I think Loeffler has the advantage there. In the Ossoff versus Perdue race, I think it's a toss-up. What we're working on is, again, getting out the vote. Mm-hmm. And the way we work on getting out the vote is we go after what we call low-propensity voters. These are whoever are the least likely to vote, people who have shown a propensity that they will vote but who don't vote. In this case, those are really people who vote only in presidential elections and don't tend to come out in either midterm elections or primary elections. So those are the folks we'll target. One of the things when I say I'm hopeful is because what's going on there is that election is going to be conducted under a microscope. You know, if you think about a bank robbery, and I think this last election is a lot like a bank robbery. There's a crime scene. People have gotten away with something right now. What causes bank robbers to rob a second bank is when nobody's hot on their tail, when nobody's watching, when the dogs aren't out baying and sniffing around. And what we've got in Georgia right now is, I'll tell you, the dogs are out. Our folks are out. They're going to be working the polls. They're going to be challengers. You've got people that are going to be watching the entire system like a hawk. I just don't think there's going to be any room for fraud. I do absolutely believe there was fraud in the general election in 2020. I'm not so worried about fraud in the Georgia election, just because I think it's going to be conducted under literally tens of thousands of watchful eyes.
No, I am hoping for that, and I know we are all watching this, because the irregularities, let's call them, but I would agree with you, the fraud that we've seen both in Pennsylvania and Michigan, Wisconsin, Arizona, I think it's just outrageous. And I know that other countries, I speak to listeners in Peru, Germany, Britain in particular, they're watching this. And we are the example of freedom around the world. And if we can't have fair and transparent elections, the world doesn't get to have them. So I think it's very important. And I hope, and I think you're going to be right, that everyone's going to pay attention to Georgia on making sure it's going to be a clean election. Something else you said on December 6th in your live stream, you were asked about a question about the Civil War, about the potential. And I've had some people ask me about it. I've talked about it on this program before. A lot of people think that we're in a cold civil war, as in this is a war of conversations. It's fighting that you have Twitter, Google, YouTube are out there fighting to silence people, and it's a war of thoughts and ideas for America. And I think you were of the opinion that we shouldn't see that. We would hope it's not going to happen, but we need to stand up and fight for our freedoms. Am I understanding that correctly? And do you want to get into clarifying that thought? Because I know a lot of people are thinking about it.
Yeah, look, I think your understanding is correct, and I would actually push it even a little bit further. And I'm not a guy that likes to promote any of this stuff. I'm not hoping for a civil war. Civil wars, by the way, just inherently speaking, they don't turn out well. Revolutions don't turn out well. Yeah. It's usually the most thuggish and brutal who prevail. So people who have a fantasy that a civil war is going to be a good thing and it's all going to work out, the odds are against us. Mm-hmm. That being said, I actually think we're not in a cold civil war anymore. I think it's actually that we have the starting of a hot civil war. And why I say that is we now have violence in our streets. Mm-hmm. For the first time in my adult lifetime, we have people coming out into the cities, destroying property, actually attacking people. We see people with my value set, conservatives, libertarians, actually being brutally attacked on the streets by people who oppose us ideologically. I think what we're seeing is the rise of something akin to the brown shirts or the red brigades in previous fascist uprisings in countries. These are citizens who are volunteering to do the work of fascist regimes. And so I think we're getting pretty close to a hot war. We've had a couple of shootings at these places where conservatives were targeted in shootings. So I do worry that we're moving closer and closer to a hot war. There's certainly a civil war going on. I think another thing that's taking place that I'm very concerned about, I think it's inevitable. I'm participating in it in a defensive posture, ultimately going on offense. We're engaged in something I call the great decoupling. What we're going to see is we're going to see two societies in one. Can we live side by side remains to be seen. But when you have these giant companies censoring us on the internet, this whole Twitter versus Parler thing that's going on, or YouTube versus Rumble thing, that's a decoupling of sorts. In other words, I'm going to go over to Parler. Everybody's welcome there, but frankly, you don't see any liberals over there. Very few liberals. All they're doing is trolling over there, and everybody ignores them. So that's a decoupling of society as you start to see us pull apart. There was a really ominous thing that happened in the last couple of weeks. MailChimp, there's an email services provider for lots of huge companies and organizations across the web. In fact, our organization uses MailChimp. They started censoring people's emails. They censored a group from Northern Virginia, the Northern Virginia Tea Party, and all they wanted to do was send out a notice that they were having a Secure the Vote rally in Northern Virginia. They wouldn't send it. They censored that topic. So I actually called my chief technology officer and said, what do we do? We're vulnerable. And one of the things he said is, Mark, the problem is there are other providers out there, Mailgun and others, and we've looked at them, we can go to them, but there's no guarantee. We don't know what's in their hearts. We don't know what they're going to do. So ultimately, there's going to have to be something we call a stack from literally from the cloud on down to the ground, all the services that conservatives need, where we won't be vulnerable to the left. That is the great decoupling that is now underway.
You know, I didn't hear about the MailChimp issue. Thank you for bringing it up, because I do want to look into that. It is troubling to me that we have such a political divide in what's supposed to be social media. And I am so happy that Parler and Rumble and other alternatives are there and people are becoming aware of it. So I thank you for bringing that up, because these are concerns when we see our First Amendment freedoms being whittled away and it's taken as commonplace, and it's very upsetting. And I find a lot of what you said, in my research on you and listening to you speak, you have a lot to say, and I really am glad that you are out there. Your voice is being heard, and I do recommend people to check it out. And I'll include the links here in the description on YouTube when I put this out. We've covered a lot of ground. We've gone over a little bit of the time that we were planning, and I love that, because I love to have the clear thoughts from any of my guests. Let me ask you, even though we've covered so much ground, is there something that we have not addressed that is important? And I know there may be many things, but something that you want to say right now that says, yeah, we need to talk about this. People need to be aware of it, like the MailChimp, like what's going on in Georgia, some of the other things that you've been speaking about.
Yeah, I mean, for me, it always comes back to this. The most important thing for anybody who's listening to you and I have this conversation is to stop listening and start acting. See, because it's up to us. This country was designed in an entirely unique way. And I mean this, when I say entirely unique, I'm not saying that to use flowery rhetoric. I'm saying historically, all of humankind, this experiment in self-governance that we have here in the United States, where we actually get to exercise the free will that we were given by God, we don't see this in human history, really. You have to go all the way back to the Old Testament to find this in what's called the Judges period. We live in a place where we actually have the right to govern ourselves. We're losing that right. And history is a constantly swinging pendulum. It actually swings back and forth. If you look at the swing of history between tyranny and really bad tyranny, there's not a lot of periods of liberty. And so we live in this unique time, and it's going to be up to you and me and our listeners and our followers to step up. And so the thing that people should always be asking themselves is not what's Mark doing or what's Michael talking about. What they should be asking themselves is, what can I do to save my country? That's the most important question. And my answer to you is something. Whatever inspires you, just make sure you're doing something. If what I'm doing inspires you, great. I appreciate it. Go to conventionofstates.com and get involved. If it's something else, if it's specifically religious liberty, get involved there. If it's Second Amendment rights, get involved there. They're all important, and it's going to take all of us to preserve the country.
Yeah, I would say this to all of our listeners, yours and mine, that may see this, and anyone else, actually people who don't normally listen to it. You are not alone. I think very often people don't hear this enough. Yes, I'm a black Republican. I'm a black Hispanic Republican. We exist. There are people who have different religious views, who have different political views. We all exist in America. We're not the only one. I know social media, the news media, the mainstream media would like people to think we have no power and we're all alone and you can't speak up. That's not true. And like you said, pick the issues that matter to you and be involved to whatever level is good for you. I think that's a message we all need to hear a lot more, because you're not alone. And when you speak up, we find people like yourself, like myself, like so many others. Larry Sharp is another great person who I speak with, personal friend. I reached out. We find out that there are people out there who have a lot of ideas that we all share because we're Americans first. I think you would agree with me, yes?
Oh, absolutely. One of the things that I love so much about Convention of States is it's really become my family, and people get involved. I travel all over the country. I was just in North Carolina. I sat in a room with 50 great patriots, and everybody cares about each other. Everybody's enjoying each other's company, and everybody feels really secure and good that they're sitting in a room with 50 people who believe the way they believe. And we find this literally, I can be on the Upper West Side of Manhattan and find that group of people. People would look outside and think, oh, it's only the liberals out there. And one of our biggest organizations in the country is New York, New Jersey. We have an incredible presence there, all conservatives or libertarians, in a place that most people think is just a blue ocean. It's not true. You're not alone. Everywhere you go, there are people just like you. They're in the grocery store with you. They're online with you. They're in your kid's school with you. They're on your kid's soccer team. They're just like you. They're afraid to speak up. And so one of the things that we have to do that, I'm really proud of you for doing, Michael, and that I do, is actually speak and don't be afraid. Be unafraid. If we don't do it, then who will? And if you do it, then people will be attracted to you, and you'll find there are a lot more people like you than you think.
I agree. And it's something I always like to mention these days, because I hear that from college campuses when I speak there. I hear it here online. People just aren't aware that you're not alone. Mark, I guarantee you we could talk for hours because
absolutely.
I think we have, in listening to you both here in this conversation, doing my research, you have so many brilliant ideas. I love hearing about the things that I don't know about, and it seems like you're connected and you're hearing like the MailChimp that I didn't know about. Hopefully I could give you the same insight on certain things here in New York. Let's talk again. I want to speak with you again. We're going to follow this up saying 2021, refresh people after the holidays and going forward. So let me tell you, first of all, I know you follow both Hanukkah and Christmas. So next week is Hanukkah. I hope you have a very good Hanukkah. And I wish you a Merry Christmas as well. I want you to have a safe COVID Christmas, which is a crazy thing. And in the beginning of the new year, hopefully we'll be able to get together, speak more, and make people aware of some of the other things you're going to be doing going into 2021. Does that sound fair?
That sounds great. I'd love to do it. God bless you. Happy Hanukkah and Merry Christmas to you as well, Michael.
All right. Thank you. Folks, this is Mark Meckler we're speaking with. Again, you can see him on Sundays, on Sunday evenings at 7 p.m. at the Convention of States Project. You can also see him on Parler under Mark Meckler. And I'm looking forward to speaking with you all again very, very soon. Thank you.